Creative Insurgents. Creative Insurgents.
Hey everybody, this is Cory Huff with theabundantartist.com.
And Melissa Dinwiddie with Living a Creative Life.
And this is the Creative Insurgents podcast.
Where we are all about living a creative life according to your own rules. Woo!
That's the last time we get to do that, Melissa.
I know.
Yeah, that's right, everybody. We are ending the Creative Insurgents podcast. But stick around because there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff happening, a bunch of new changes, a bunch of really exciting stuff. We are going to be relaunching a new podcast, or at least I'm going to be relaunching a new podcast called the Abundant Artist Podcast, which you can actually go and see now if you go to theabundantartist.com/podcast. There's a link to a couple of episodes that are already up in iTunes, so go check that out. And for the rest of this episode of Creative Insurgents, we're going to talk about why we're ending the podcast, and we're also going to talk about some of the things that we learned that are applicable to what you're doing in your art business. And you'll want to stick around to the very end because we're going to talk about some other really exciting things that you're definitely going to want to hear about.
Woohoo!
If you are a subscriber to the Creative Insurgents podcast, you will want to go over to theabundantartist.com/podcast and subscribe there because it's going to be a brand new podcast with a brand new feed. Melissa, I'm really sad that we're ending this.
I am too.
Yeah,
I love working with you, Cory.
And I love working with you. We have we've been partnering on various projects for almost 3 years. So why in the world would we stop working together? And that's what the question that we want to answer today. So there's a lot of stuff that we've learned from working on Creative Insurgents together. And one of the first things was just getting started, like just jumping into a project that you're excited about works really well when you're getting a business off the ground. And when you and I were first starting working on projects together, that's what we did. We were like, we get along, we talk well together, we feel comfortable enough with each other to be open and honest and give each other good feedback. And that was really enough for us to sort of push each other and get things off the ground. You know, we started a couple of years ago with the Art Empowers membership site, and we just worked together to help push each other and build each other up. And I don't know, what was that experience like for you, just having somebody there when we were getting started?
You know, it was so fantastic, Cory. I was very nervous about partnering because I'd never partnered in business with anybody before to this extent. I mean, I'd done little things before, you know, helping somebody else whose work that I really love, helping promote them and things like that, but I'd never done a true joint venture before, and so I was really scared. I got this little book. You might remember this in the early days when we were talking about whether we wanted to jump in and do this. I got this little ebook on how to do a successful joint venture, and there were like 50 questions. And it's kind of like the questions that you would ask before you get married, you know? It's
totally.
like questions
we had the get married conversation.
We had the get married conversation, and we went through, it took us like 2 long meetings on Skype, I think, and we went through each and every question. Mm-hmm. And that was amazing because it made me realize that, wow, we are really on the same page. We're really in alignment with our values and our goals. Just like as if you're getting married, right?
Mm-hmm,
so I was still a little like, how is this going to work? But working with you has been so fun because I think our skills really complement each other, and the things that we are good at and are interested in doing, I think those really complement each other as well. And it's just been so amazing to know that I'm not alone, that there's somebody else who's working on this project with me.
Mm-hmm, totally. And the whole, just even the process of walking through all those questions, like we created a shared Google document and we walked through all those questions and said, you know, who's going to take on what responsibility, like who's going to build the website and who's going to handle the money and who's going to upload content to the site and who's going to handle scheduling all the calls and all that stuff. You know, we even put together like, what are the requirements if we decide that we want to end our partnership?
Yep.
You know, we had an exit strategy. Like we decided that we would split the business 50-50, and we decided on a buyout strategy if one person wanted to buy the other person out. We had all of that in place in advance, and I think that just going through that process helped me get really clear on what the business was going to be.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm listening to, for those of you who get this, there's a podcast right now called Startup. I don't know if you're listening to this, Melissa, but it's a guy who used to be on, he used to be a producer on This American Life and on Planet Money, two of my favorite podcasts. And he's starting a new company, and as part of starting that company, he's recording the entire process of
Mm.
picking a name and finding a partner and finding investors, that whole thing. The podcast is called Startup, and you can find it in iTunes. I'd highly recommend listening to it for anybody who's trying to figure out like what kind of a business they want to be in. It's a really interesting podcast, and he's really open, like strangely open about some of the difficult details. And he talks about this, about the whole finding a partner and having that marriage conversation. One of the other things that we figured out was that as our businesses grew, right, like we had Art Empowers, which is a membership site focused on artists who are at the very beginning of their career and just trying to get things off the ground. And at that time, I think I was still figuring out what exactly the Abundant Artist was going to be, and I think you were figuring out what kind of products you were going to be offering through Living a Creative Life. And our businesses grew independently of Art Empowers, and you went in one specific direction, and I went in a different direction. And as we continued growing, our target audiences started diverging pretty widely. And working on Creative Insurgents, it's been really fun to have on various people from different backgrounds and have them talk about what it's like to live a creative life on their own terms. But one of the pieces of feedback that we got from a lot of the people listening to the podcast is that they were looking for a very specific type of guest. They were looking for professional artists, and they were not so much interested in creative coaches and other stuff like that. And what was that like for you when we were getting that feedback and reading that feedback from our audience?
Oh, it's just very clarifying to know, and I could see it in the responses and the comments and stuff, that people are really interested in, okay, I'm an artist, I want to make money from this, how do I do it? So that's really what they've been coming to the podcast for primarily, and that's fantastic. And what I'm more, my direction is really about getting people creating, getting people past whatever the resistance is, helping them live big, bold, creative lives, whether or not money is involved with their creative process. So
Right.
we do have those people in our audience as well, but the primary like demand that we've been getting from our audience at Creative Insurgents is, I want to learn from people who have built up really successful businesses from their art, and so that I can do the same thing for myself. And that's, there's a subset of that audience that is also an audience for what I do at Living a Creative Life, but it's not a real overlap.
Yeah, it's not, and so that became a problem, right? Because you and I have different businesses. We have, and even just on a technical level, like getting people onto your mailing list versus my mailing list. If we're running a joint mailing list, how do we, what do we market to people? Like, what links do we send them to buy our various products? How do we segment that audience to make sure that we're marketing things that they're interested in? And so it just became very complicated. Like, we were designing these really complicated marketing strategies to essentially market two different companies to these people.
Exactly. Yeah, and if we were, say, both of our businesses were completely joined, then we were partnering on all of our business endeavors, and then the podcast was really to kind of promote that endeavor that both of us were involved in. That would be one thing.
Mm-hmm.
But when the podcast is one animal, and then our businesses are such different animals that feed off of that, business-wise, it didn't make sense, no matter how much fun we're having.
Yeah. So, Melissa, you and I had a couple of challenging conversations. Not like we didn't argue or fight or anything. Just we had to have some tough conversations about what are we going to do with this thing. It's been a year since we created this podcast, and we've had fun and we've got people listening, but it wasn't really driving our businesses forward in the way that we wanted it to.
Right.
Yeah. And so we made the decision to end the podcast in the format that it's currently in, and I'm going to relaunch the Abundant Artist podcast. And of course, you've got your email newsletter and the other stuff that you're working on. And one of the things that I'm really excited about is you and I are still going to be working on the new podcast together in a different way. So Melissa, you have sold art like most of your life, basically since you started making calligraphy and ketubah. And for those who don't know your backstory, just give us a brief overview of how you got started selling art and calligraphy and ketubah.
Well, let's see. I started doing calligraphy back in 1995, and in I think 96 or maybe even as early as 95, I started selling my work to family and friends, and then to clients, and I was doing all kinds of calligraphic commissions at that time, including original ketubahs, or ketubot is the plural in Hebrew, but Americans tend to say ketubahs, and they were all on a one-off commission basis. And then in 2001, I made my first ketubah print because I sort of crunched the numbers and realized that if I could sell multiples at a lower price point, and I could create lots of prints, then I might be able to get off of the freelance agony train of, famine, drought, flood, So, so that's what I've been doing since then. Since in 2001, I came out with my first print, and I added over the years a couple dozen more prints to that. So that's been a business going for many years now.
Right. And that's what I'm excited about, because over the next few episodes of the Abundant Artist podcast, we are going to take a deep dive into how an artist starts an art print business. Now, Melissa has already been through this process once. She started her ketubah business back, I think you said 2001. She took her original art and turned it into prints. Now Melissa has a new line of art, her new series that she's created, and we're going to follow her as she works on getting that new line of art into lines of prints and start marketing those. We're going to follow her through figuring out who her ideal audience is, figuring out where her audience where she needs to get her stuff so that her audience sees it, how to put together an e-commerce shop for prints. We're going to go through all of that over this episode, as well as several episodes to come. They won't always be in sequential order because Melissa has to do some of that work, and we need to document some of it. So you'll want to subscribe to the podcast, because it'll probably be once every few episodes. We'll come back and revisit so that you can learn how, as Melissa does, how to run an art print business.
I'm excited. This is going to be really fun.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really fun. And just because you've been through this process once, maybe you can share some of the concerns you might have, because I think that those listening are going to identify with some of those concerns.
Yeah, totally. It's interesting as I think about it. I have a ton of experience selling prints, but a very, very specific kind of print that's personalized. I fill people's names in. Used to do that all by hand, and now it's all digitized with calligraphic fonts designed from my actual hand calligraphy. Really, really different thing from what you and I are going to be working on together, but the general principle of creating reproductions is the same. And when my very first print was a giclée, made from a big inkjet printer, before they were really readily available for regular people like you and me. They were still massively expensive back then.
Mm-hmm.
And it was pretty new to have shops that sold these kinds of prints. And I worked with this one shop for a while, and I got frustrated with quality control and just general control, and also how expensive the prints were. So I started printing in-house, and I bought a massive printer, and I started doing everything myself. and I climbed that learning curve, which was a steep one. And then just a couple of years ago, I got really tired of doing all the printing myself and the packaging and printing out the shipping labels and all of that stuff that, somebody else could be doing. That's not where my skills and my greatest value lies, right? In printing and packaging and shipping. So once again, I outsourced my prints and I found a local print company. So now I just send them the files. So now I'm looking at how do I want to do these smaller non-customized prints? What of these various different methods, what do I want to use? Do I want to go back to printing in-house? Do I want to outsource? There's lots of new possibilities nowadays that weren't around back in 2005 or 2001. So these are all the things I'm looking at.
Yeah, we put together a few weeks ago. I released a guide to the print-on-demand industry, and it's just since you started doing prints on your own, that the print-on-demand industry has absolutely exploded.
Oh my God, yeah.
There are in that guide, I think there are 20 or 25 different companies that offer artists the ability to just upload a high-resolution image and print that and then frame it and ship it. They do all the work for you. You just make the art and upload it. So we'll look at, does it make sense to go with one of those print-on-demand companies? There's also the option of working with a single printer directly, right, and just sending them all your high-resolution images and having them do the prints and drop ship it for you and not have a middleman. And then there's some other options that we're going to get into as well. So this is going to be pretty exciting stuff. I know it's a very complex, very intimidating world for artists who are new to this, so I think it's going to be fun for us to explore that.
Definitely. I'm really excited about this, Cory.
Yeah. The other question that comes up that you and I talked about a couple days ago was, okay, so you're making this art, and who are you going to sell it to?
Right.
So you have an existing audience, and you've been selling Katuba and calligraphy forever, but this new line of work is very different, right? Tell me a little bit about the experience that you had putting some of this art out and realizing that maybe there's an audience for it and some of the feedback you got from Instagram and stuff.
Yeah, Instagram is absolutely my favorite social network ever. And I started, several months ago, I started sharing my process on Instagram. Here's the blank canvas, here's the blank canvas with a few marks on it, here's the next layer, et cetera, and was really kind of astounded to see strangers like popping out of the blue and starting to follow me and liking my pictures, which is so awesome, because I strongly recommend that people start sharing their work in a way that you feel comfortable doing, because when you do, it's not that you're doing it in order to get praise for it. It's not that at all. It's you create the art because it makes you happy. You create what you need to create, what's going to feed you. And when you see other people's responses to it, it enables you to see that work through their glasses rather than through your hypercritical glasses, right? So I'll often put something out there that I think, this is crap, and I'll get all these likes on it, which will help me see that, maybe it's not entirely crap, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's been really, really useful, and I do have a shop on my Living a Creative Life website for my original art, which I have sold some pieces through an email list, sending out my art as I make it. Mm-hmm. But the prints, I haven't had prints up on my site for I don't think I've ever had prints up on my Living a Creative Life site. So this will be a new thing. But I think that the audience for the prints that I'm looking at for this project with you and me, Cory, is going to, I suspect there's going to be a big overlap between the audience for those works and the audience that's already subscribed on my Living a Creative Life newsletter.
And why do you think that is? Why do you think that there's going to be so for those who don't know what you do, Melissa, outside of making art, maybe talk a little bit about what Living a Creative Life is all about and some of the courses and stuff that you teach, just briefly.
Yeah. So I'm on a mission to empower people to feed their own creative hungers. And so everything that I do at Living a Creative Life is really with the intention of getting people past all the crap that gets in their way so that they're doing the things that they love, so that they're living the big, bold, creative lives that they really, really want, not the settling lives, right?
Mm-hmm.
The programs and the products that I offer are all designed to get people creating and having fun and playing in the creative sandbox. I have a Creative Sandbox 101 mini course that comes out every few months.
And what do you talk about in that course?
That is it's a course that is walking people through several of my 10 keys to creative flow, otherwise known as my 10 rules for the creative sandbox, which are the quote-unquote rules that I made for myself to get myself out of perfectionist paralysis and stuckness and back to creating and painting and doing what I loved. So I walk people through those rules and I give them little exercises to do that in 10 or 15 minutes a day that get them playing and get them seeing that they get to do this. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be great. It just has to be fun. And once they sort of clear out those gremlins and that perfectionist paralysis, it just frees people up amazingly.
So let me ask you this. My perception of your art, and you may have a different experience here, my perception is that this new line of art that you're making has grown out of that work that you've been doing for the last few years.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So what you're seeing on my Instagram feed right now, Cory, are those are not print ready. Those are little web optimized. They're 750 pixels by 750 pixels or something. But what they are is they're art that I've previously created as a background, and then essentially my sound bites, my sayings, my mantras that I turn to in my own life to get myself unstuck, pull myself out of the comparison trap, get myself out of perfectionist paralysis, and get myself to my art table or whatever creating I want to be doing right then.
Mm-hmm.
And the art that I'm looking at making into prints is, before I started these little square Instagram art quotes that I've been sending out for the past few months, I have about 200 calligraphic pieces that I've made, little tiny pieces that are watercolor or some kind of background with whatever words I needed to hear right in that moment to get me creating, to keep me from getting sucked into perfectionist paralysis. So my audience is basically me. I mean, the people in my audience are the people who are struggling with the exact same things that I struggle with,
mm-hmm.
and I make the art to alleviate that particular struggle. So that's why I think there's a good overlap.
Do you think that a lot of artists, that is true for other artists, that their ideal audience is dealing with the same questions that the artist is dealing with?
That's a really good question, Cory. I think it depends on the kind of art. If you are working, for example, in abstract art, then what, as an artist, might be in your head and in your unconscious as you're making the art might be totally different from what somebody else reads into the art. So it doesn't necessarily matter if the same thing is going on in their heads. If you're more of a representational artist, perhaps, or if you're dealing with words on your art, then I would suspect that there is quite a lot of overlap between, what the artist is dealing with and what the audience is dealing with.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm looking forward to exploring this more and figuring out what you learn about your audience.
Me too. I'm so excited. I think it's going to be great fun, and we're all going to learn from it.
Yep, cool. Well, Melissa, it's been fun. The Creative Insurgents podcast has been fun. I'm excited we got to do it together, and I'm excited about the Abundant Artist podcast launching. Any other words before we sign off?
I just want to say, in fact, I'll sing it. Thank you, Cory. It's been a great run. I love working with you, Cory. We've had so much fun, and now we're gonna have more fun together. Woo!
Oh my gosh, I don't even know how to respond to that. For those who don't know, Melissa is also an improv artist. You've gotten really heavily involved in this improv thing, and you're doing improv musicals.
I am.
So if you're ever in Melissa's neck of the woods in California, you should go see her do an improv musical. I haven't seen one yet. I need to get down there and see it when I get back to the States. Thank you. I'm not going to sing, but thank you for that. I have so appreciated working on Creative Insurgents with you as well. I'm excited to see where this goes. So thank you, and thank you to everybody that has listened. Thanks for sticking with us for a year and for your feedback. We take your feedback seriously, and I hope that you'll join us for this next phase.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks a lot. Take care.